Hey everyone, welcome in. In this video, what I'm going to be doing is going through some past student projects to show you what they did for the Linear Perspective project. Now, of course, our project deals with taking a series of photos of your project. You're going to be turning in 2 photos that show preliminary drawings or different stages of your project. And then the third and final image is going to be of the completed project. Now, the stages don't have to be the exact ones pictured here. I'm just looking at seeing the development of your project, and then, of course, the final image. On the examples in the instructions, I showed this one here, which was very basic, just squares and rectangles. The student did a wonderful job on the shading. I'm going to just remind you as well, don't forget to do a border all the way around the edges. You can kind of see that the border is at the bottom and then off to the left-hand side. It's probably my fault for cropping the image a little bit too much, but don't forget those steps because those are important. In the video from Smart History, they showed you how to do an interior room. That would be totally great to do for this project as well. Keeping in mind all of the objects within the room all have to be tied in to the vanishing point. And we can also do an exterior scene, a street scene, but keep in mind that we want to make sure that we are able to show linear perspective here in the buildings, in the windows, the doorways, the street, and so on. Do not focus on the background elements of the landscape, such as the sky or the sun or birds or mountains. Those really don't show linear perspective. Now, this was a fantastic project because the student experimented with squares, rectangles, triangles, as well as the different lengths of those objects. The shading was perfect. This is an older project, and I do have a lot of older projects submitted here in this video, and they're all done in just regular graphite. But I do want you to use color in the projects. Keep in mind that these smaller forms are actually a lot more difficult to create than the larger forms. You just have more room and you have, more airiness about this space. So don't confine yourself to very small figures because they are more difficult. I also suggest staying away from anything with a circle or an arc because those are difficult to replicate. Remember, we're creating a primary shape and then we're creating a secondary shape that needs to parallel the first shape. When you do that with a circle, that's really difficult and most students will fail at that. And we want to have a good time with this project. So keep with the basic trapezoids, rectangles, triangles. This student showed off a little bit with a wonderful shape within a shape up here. But keep in mind that you want to make sure all forms are free of the vanishing point. They should not be connected here. In this image, the vanishing point is way off to the right. I remember this student was a civil engineering student, and so he really mastered this technique very, very well already. I always joke around that this student was single because it took the student forever to complete this project. I always like my projects to be about 2 hours long for the points for this project. And something like this probably took close to 6 to 8 hours. So make sure, just keep in mind, the projects are meant to keep around the 2-hour mark. And they don't have to be that intense to get full credit. This is a wonderful landscape scene, but remember, anything north of the horizon line there has nothing to do with linear perspective. Everything really is below. The street itself, the bus on the left-hand side, the trucks on the right-hand side. We even have a regular triangle shape off to the right. That's okay. Above the western end sign, we have that trapezoidal figure. We have buildings on either side. There's a lot of products here that are in linear perspective, and that makes this a great project. One thing that students do wrong when creating a street scene is that they try to alter the stress cracks in the sidewalk as well as the parking stall lines. They always try to figure those toward the horizon or toward the vanishing point, and they should actually be parallel with the horizon line like they are here. So our horizon line, of course, is a horizontal line. And notice too how all these lines in the sidewalk and way off to the right in the parking lot are all horizontal. That's the way they should be. The orthogonals are actually the sides of the building, the tops and bottoms of the windows and doorways, the top of the roof. All of those should be focused toward the vanishing point. Students ask, should they erase the horizon line and vanishing point? For the most part, you definitely can, because those are easily identifiable sections of the project. And a lot of times it just looks better when they're removed. And this student is, again, one that had just too much time on their hands over this weekend. I love the toaster off on the left-hand side. And really, you can create anything you want as long as you can illustrate to me that you know the concepts of linear perspective. And of course, if it's really good, I usually throw it in my example video here. And I remember this student particularly because he told me he had never drawn before. And I told him he was lying to me because it was just so perfect. And you should have fun with this project. This student was probably on some type of drug because this is so cool. It's so not only beautifully rendered, but it's also so surrealistic. It's very much like a Dali image. Perspective, I'm totally okay with that. I like to keep the projects as open-ended as possible because I definitely don't want to grade 500 of the same project. You'd start to get mind numb after that. I love to see the different ways that students look at this project and complete it. And you're definitely not bound by 7 shapes. If you want to do more shapes and just do some trials of things, that's the best way of learning. And look how incredibly well this was rendered. This was probably done with marker rather than colored pencil. Now this one actually, even though it's rendered perfectly, it really upset me getting this project because this was stolen off of Google Images. You always want to make sure in my class that you do original work. You could have easily altered an image like this for your own purposes, but recreating something that's already existing really falls under the line of plagiarism, and I would make you redo that project over again. And this was quite fun and inventive. Make sure on the shading is done in 2 directions. You want to shade from left to right, and then you want to shade from top to bottom. That way it eliminates any of the shading marks or directional marks that you would see if you only shaded it in one direction. It just completes a much nicer image. And I thought this one was very cool, very Metropolis-like. And the student used, she had asked if she could use watercolor. That was her medium of choice. And she did have enough background in it to use it. So it turned out really, really well. Again, this is a 2-point perspective image. And way back pre-COVID, I used to put the very best examples from each class on display. And these are really outstanding examples. So once again, remember you're turning in 3 images, 2 preliminary, 1 of the finished work. The work below, I'm just showing this one because I like the different stages that the student used. But overall, as far as linear perspective goes, it's not that outstanding. It definitely a beautiful artist rendering of a scene. But when we look at what is actually in perspective here, just the sides of the railroad and the individual railroad ties beneath it are all that's really in perspective. The telephone lines or the power lines on either side, that's more of an indication of scale rather than perspective. This is much something more as to what I'm looking for. And particularly since I'm fond of books and libraries, this was really a great image for me. And again, 2 preliminary images, 1 finished image. Please use colored pencils. And you want to use for the material itself to draw on, I always suggest illustration board, minimum size 11 by 14 inches. And then you can also use drawing paper if you have that. Just stay away from printer paper. It's too thin, it doesn't erase well, and it's just too small of an image to really create something that is extraordinary. So if you have any questions for me or anything like that, I'm always available before and after class, during office hours, or via email.